Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles, and welcome to my Family Office TV. Today, survival of the family office. Debate, Robles and McLaughlin. Of course, it features our special guest, and that would be Jamie McLaughlin, founder of J.H. McLaughlin and Company, a management consulting firm focused on strategy and practice management for wealth management, investment advisory, private banks, trust companies, single and multi-family offices. I've known Jamie literally since the first week I founded Family Office Association many a decade ago. We're giving away our ages, Jamie. And to his credit, being so accomplished, and I was nothing, he was probably among the first people in New York that I met with and really helped to guide me early on in some very important decisions, including bringing on who would be a wonderful president of FOA and Joe Riley, where there's no question any successes that FOA had would not have happened if it wasn't for me meeting McLaughlin, being introduced to others, McCarthy, and of course, Riley, who I mentioned. So I'm greatly appreciative. I am going to say the word debate because I'm looking to make this a debate because, one, I don't think we do enough of this in our community. It's a little too politically correct. It's a little too down the middle. My belief is debate is great. If you're wrong, you learn. Part of courage and being a courageous leader, a thinker, an action taker, all comes down to openly debating ideas. You already know what you know. Attempt to know what you don't know. I believe in having strong opinions, but weakly held. So this summer, I'm rolling out my Survival of the Family Office programming series, primarily for my members of SFO Continuity. Per popular demand, I'm interested in the subject, including my solo commentaries, my traditional interviews on the subject, and to Jamie's credit, really having the guts and having the gumption and a very worthy, if I could use the word competitor, in terms of the subject of debate and really the first one. And no one else I could think of other than Jamie that would be the first guest that I would like to have on. So I admit, before some of you comment, I know a traditional debate would have a traditional independent moderator and a little bit more of a formal structure. To Jamie's credit, he's coming on my platform. I kind of initiated the core questions, but I'm definitely going to encourage Jamie to throw out some questions of his own. And once we really get into it, make it more of an open discussion. There may be some points, I'm sure there are, that we'll agree on, but I could tell you, there will definitely be some points that we don't agree on. We do encourage audience interaction. My God, I see we have someone from Poland, someone from Vienna. We're really going international on this, McLaughlin, and welcome to the show. How are you, Jamie?
Hey, I'm great, Angelo. Thanks for having me on.
A pleasure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a relatively brief, well, by Angelo standards, let's call it maybe 45 seconds, a minute, open commentary. I'm going to allow Jamie to comment on the commentary or effectively give his own frame and commentary. And then we have about 7 or 8 core questions that we're going to rotate, so to speak, who goes first. So my open commentary, I admit I am an extreme advocate of the single family office. In no means, and many of you have heard my commentaries, do I think broadly that single family offices are optimized and doing as good as they could be. I often say many of them, pardon the mathematical probably incorrectness of my comment, are very mediocre. But I think the mediocrity has a lot to do with lack of rigor, of standards, of systems, of practice and best practices management, not so much from outside forces. I believe internally that the single family office is the ultimate in privacy, control, and customization. And I believe, and this partially comes from my global travels, knowing many families that go back often hundreds of years, some in Europe that might even be on this StreamYard, as we call it, Family Office TV that I'm doing now, that will agree with me when I make the bold comment of you cannot have dynastic wealth without ownership and control of private companies. And I know I'm going to hear a lot of stuff about private equity, about family offices can't do it internally. I believe I'm going to counteract those points. But do I feel for a second that family offices are doing incredible? No. But I feel internally the capacity and capability is there for them to be excellent, often without significant changes to personnel. At the end of the day, you want to engage the family, you want to have control, you want the rising generation to be involved, you want to have tax control, you need to do it internal. I think you've been lied to effectively by the industry that you can't or you're too small. And these are all subjects that we're going to cover. Jamie, I'm going to kick it to you for either a commentary completely separate, a rebuttal and commentary. The floor is yours for 2 minutes.
Well, thanks. We have a pretty open tableau here, so we could go in many directions, but just so there's some openers and partly in response to what you said, I just don't know what a single family office is. It's an amorphous thing that we could describe in many different fashions and perhaps suggest a taxonomy for at least to consider the many different variations, one of which prompted by your notion of the dynastic family. We'll get to that second. But that notion tells me that there are family offices that are constructed because the source of wealth was an operating business, and the operating business still is in existence, and it is either in control or a large minority family interest. Those entities that are single family offices that are derived from that source of wealth, that are a continuing business, clearly are different. They are to be considered and set apart as potentially those that will emerge where there will be best practices, where there will be better professional standards, where we'll start to see exemplars. So I want to make sure that's clear. The comment on dynastic wealth is the only other thing I want to be prompted by, where I think we can find some agreement. The dynastic wealth concept itself is something we could contemplate in terms of policy. I'm a former politician and policy guy, so I don't want to miss the opportunity to say that dynastic wealth in its own sense is something that I'm not sure is a public good. But if families want to do good, I'd encourage dynastic wealth in that order. And we, in terms of policy regimes across the world, there are different orientations towards that concentration of wealth, might in fact contemplate that wealth as doing good and be benign in terms of policy. But I will also say that if they don't do good and there is social unrest, I think the challenge for dynastic wealth will be increasing. So there's lots of considerations here, but I think for that dynastic wealth, the goal, if it is the goal, in terms of sustainability, dynastic meaning sustainable family offices, I think we can concentrate on that group of more mature and sustainable entities as clearly drifting in the direction of greater professionalization and greater improvement in terms of productivity, efficiencies, and any other measures that we would consider, which are the kinds of things that I focus on in my consulting practice. So in terms of an opener, we have no debate. We're in agreement.
Well, in terms of a little bit of clarity, maybe from my perspective, because you did bring up something that I am reminded of. Yes, could it be an existing actual business that is generational, that is part of dynastic wealth? Of course. I'm actually talking a little bit more beyond that in terms of actually going out and buying, of owning and having controlling interest in private companies is a way to engage the rising generation and is a way to have control, including tax control. I remember about 5 years ago, I did an interview on investing with private companies with someone that you know, and we both respect, and Christy Kegler. And she brought up the subject of engaging the rising generation, of rolling up their sleeves and getting their hands dirty, hiring and firing, how the real world works, a little bit interest rates, inflation, bank negotiation. She ended up, in my opinion, being 100% correct. I was a little slow to the game, and now you could say that I'm an extreme advocate. Could I make the argument, and now you will disagree, that the majority of asset managers, MFOs, and let's broadly say vendors are effectively inadequate? they're of course going to be conflicted because they care about their own interest and their profit margins. And comparative to a proper, the rightly structured single family office, that is not going to have the bureaucracy and hierarchy. You're going to laugh at that and say they're equally stifled with that. But I did say the proper single family office. Of course, I'm positioning that to be admittingly a little bit to my advantage. Now you may end up disagreeing with the latter two comments that I made. We're going to get to the core subjects, which I'll read off the first subject once you comment, and you're going to get the first stab at it. But if you wanted to comment on my opening comment to your open comment.
Well, I think your argument is specious. I think there's nothing to back up what you just said.
Welcome to the world of the single family office. A lot of it is qualitative.
But what you just said is throwing out the argument that all commercial enterprises are not virtuous and single family offices are somehow uniquely have greater virtue. That's just ridiculous.
No, that is an accurate comment.
But there's too many variations.
By one family completely dedicated to them. It could be that.
Well, I think we have to really focus on the agency dilemma that affects all of us in all of our lives. We all have some degree of self-interest. And that's just simply inescapable for the species. And so to the degree that we cast some kind of a judgment on those people that have commercial enterprises, I think that's just, that's my point about species. That's a bridge too far for me. But I think the variations vary very widely. And just to put you in a position to sort of at least contemplate what you just said, if, for instance, family offices are, and clearly they are moving in the direction of exploring direct investments, but if they are doing that for whatever reasons, you mentioned the next gen, if they're doing that, and those are commercial enterprises that they're making direct investments in, they are then too, as investors and allocators in a commercial enterprise in some degree with a profit interest because they'd like to have greater excess return than less excess return, of course. So I think self-interest is really the issue that we need to make a judgment in. And I have no interest. I have no problem with self-interest as long as it's for the purpose that at the end of the day is virtuous. I think the key word here is virtue.
And I'm going to throw out the first framing of a question that I want you to answer it first. And again, to make it a little bit interesting, I may interrupt or have a comment, just like I don't mind you doing it to me. I think it actually adds to the discussion. That broad question, and I know you may frame it as it's different for asset managers and MFOs versus SFOs, and that's fine. Do your thing. The question is what I believe to be a fallacy of scale, and that it really doesn't matter, and often scale, to me, sometimes specifically in a single family office, is a detriment and albatross to being nimble, fast, and creative.
Gee, I think it's interesting. Scale, let's take that in two parts. If two swim lanes, as we just prior to the show, for the audience's purposes, we were talking about our swim lanes, Angelo perhaps being in a swim lane, that's the single family office, and my being in the commercial wealth management, ultra high net worth swim lane, and they're right next to each other. And sometimes my Australian crawl swim stroke goes into your swim lane. I think the issue of scale is important here. I don't think most family offices make any sense from an economic perspective. And
you're wrong. We'll get to that.
But that's okay. That's a choice somebody can make. But to the degree that scale confers the opportunity to do more, most of these direct expenses are related to staff. And get the best people. It doesn't mean you have to have a lot of people, but the best people, which costs some money. Scale confers the ability to do better with more and presumptively better people given the compensation requirements. Separately, in the commercial wealth management space, there's quite a remarkable evolution underway. And it's in the center of the fairway for the work that I do, whether it's compensation, pricing, capital structure, staff configuration, service model, tech stack. Scale has been, relatively speaking, elusive. And on an organic basis, scale has not occurred. The scaling has occurred because of the introduction of capital into the industry, capital sponsors, and the inorganic activity that's going on. So there has not been benefits of scale yet, largely yet, but I think that could occur. So, the scale question, Angelo, that you're raising, it goes two ways. But I do think in the family office world, there are great billionaire families that enjoy the benefit of getting great people and doing great things and really serving their families in terms of their own needs and doing some public good as well in terms of their philanthropic and wealth generation, wealth transfer planning processes. Really great. But that's because they're super wealthy. And I think for the most part, most family offices, if we look at the absolute number of family offices, the estimates are ranging all over the place. So I won't take a stab at a number as to where that starts, but to the degree that most of them don't make any economic sense, they'll never have the benefit of scale.
Oh, one question to you, Jamie, because you brought it up before in the past, and I don't think I totally agreed or wrapped my arms around it. If you wanted to add a little bit to what you said based on this question, you have been somewhat of an advocate of respect of gigantic hedge fund managers, often worth 10, 15, 20 billion or more internally, building more institutional level, as you describe it, a single family office. If you don't mind, if you could pontificate what you found to be of value in your research and your process of engaging or looking at them from afar, and how others in the community could learn.
Well, let me make it clear. I think in terms of the best performing from an economic perspective, from a productivity perspective, from an efficiency perspective, some of the best performing exemplars within single family office land are people that came from financial services, whether they're hedge fund principals or private capital principals, real estate principals, or other. They were in the investment or capital markets or financial services areas. They came out of entities or training that was profit driven. And to the degree that they have formed management companies separate from their operating businesses that were in financial services, they have different analytical approaches and expectations for outcomes that are very profit motivated. And the behavior of the people and many of the cultural anthropology of those places follow just as a natural course. And so I think the outcomes that they're having in terms of their presumptive, by the way, because there's no published information here, but their presumptive outcomes for their growth rather than a diminution of their assets, their growth of their assets, their philanthropic opportunities, their public impact has just been greater by any number of measures. I mean, the latest thing being the Bloomberg Philanthropic Foundation's gifts to Johns Hopkins University. And that kind of thing can't happen without great management, without great people. But it started because there was sufficient scale to do that.
Wonderful. So again, I'm going to restate the question and give my, let's call it, response to it. The fallacy of scale and why this really doesn't matter, and is often a detriment and albatross to being nimble, fast, and creative. My perspective is going to be, of course, more in my focus of the single family office, but I think broadly the commentary will be applicable. SFOs do not benefit from a lot of hierarchy and bureaucracy, which is inevitably going to happen in any large organization, which in the family office world, single, I may define that as 20 or more, let alone 50, 100, or like the giant hedge fund managers that have teams of multiple hundreds to thousands. It's not 1990 anymore. They're not getting, now we'll get to investment performance a little later, 30 to 40% returns. They're too big. They're not nimble. They're not as creative. And you look at their return profiles, they're broadly below a passive index. Now, those are all things that we're going to get to a little later. So the question from my perspective, does a sub $500 million quote unquote single family office deserve to exist? Absolutely. And the efficiencies and scale with technologies And although I'm not the biggest person on outsourcing, which we're going to get to later, but a part of it you do need another set of eyes, especially if you're smaller. You do not need to be $1 billion, to be 2 billion, to be 3 billion, to be 5 billion. You do not, absolutely, you do not need an investment team of dozens and dozens of people. It's a complete lie. You don't need compliance like they need unless you want to become a GP. If you want to become a GP and build up that kind of infrastructure, then go for it. Then you're really heading into being a commercial enterprise, which I, depending on the goals of the family, may not be the biggest advocate of. I think that there maybe is not so much to learn from a lot of the big iconic investment managers that spend all their time in Hamptons in the summer. What are they really doing in today's world that's creative? They're asset gatherers placating to the institutional community. And I don't think there's really a lot for the vast majority of single family offices to learn from. Do I think they're wickedly smart? Absolutely. Do I think that we can learn some principles of institutional level investing and compliance that I, being a student of the single family office, would have an interest in and could help impart some of that to, let's call it small, below $1 billion family offices? Of course. Besides the albatross when it comes to investing, why do I need scale to address my tax needs, my estate needs, really even my concierge services? Now, there comes a point when you are too small, maybe at just simply a couple of millions, where having a single family office, although I could argue if you follow lender versus the IRS and you set it up a certain way, you're going to get tax advantages for doing that. Now, the devil's going to be in the details. And by the way, when I'm talking about these things, I'm living through it, creating my structures in Wyoming, my holding company, which we'll get to shortly, and my interest investing in owning and controlling private companies, and for me, an unregulated private trust company. So we're going to get to the issue of talent that Jamie brought up in a separate subject that we could do a deeper dive on. I think it is way overrated. You could easily, I'm going to throw out that term, recruiters are going to hate me, easily build an impactful team being active as a single family office, and it's way easier than you think or what you've been led to believe. Now, you got to have proper practice management, and you have to be willing to pay. But I think you're underestimating what you're paying in active management and how a part of that could be repurposed, dedicated to your family office. I know that being nimble, being able to make quick decisions, being a creator who's still involved in the family office that could take more risk. If I don't take enough risk and I'm too conservative, am I going to keep pace with the true cost of inflation? Am I going to maintain purchasing power decade after decade? And what lessons am I teaching my children and grandchildren that I'm afraid that I don't do this, I don't do that? We're looking to play it safe. 3 to 4% is okay. I want bloodline. I want skin in the game. I want alignment of interest. And I want people that are, quote unquote, in my opinion, not afraid to win, let alone in a single family office, unlike a PE fund that is looking to draw on capital, charges you a truckload, not just the 2 and 20, but the expenses that you often really don't see. And they're inpatient capital. I want patient capital. I want single family offices to stop taking the easy way out of overly allocating, of being an LP, and take more control. Developing an investment policy statement and asset allocation is easy. If you can't do that internally and you're a single family office, shame on you. Shame. That's unacceptable. Okay, Jamie, I'll allow you either a chance to comment or we can move on to the next question.
Wow. Well, let's just unpack a couple of things there. The notion of nimbleness came up. I think the idea was that there was no hierarchy, therefore that was nimbleness, being the opposite of the hierarchical comment, was an advantage. I would generally agree with that. And I will also say that no one said that having more people and greater expenses meant that you had a better outcome. You have to have the right people, and it might be only a handful of people. But let's make sure we divide the question here a little bit. So in these entities, there is inexorably an investment function. And that's where the costs are. That's where the primary costs are. A secondary part of what are the absolute costs, not the unit cost, comes in the service regime for the multi-generational families, larger G4, 5, 6 families where there are many different households. And the family offices are structured really to service those families. The investment team is largely what you and I would call a fixed cost that is generating portfolio outcomes into the entities for the various households within the generations. And so there's an investment team and there's a service team. It has some features that for those very multi-generational family offices that look like commercial wealth management firms, in fact. But there's no question you could do more with less on the investment side. There's just simply no question. So the question of the unit cost or the cost per head is different. And without question, you could get greater people and do some really good things. But I think what's most important in my observation is that a huge majority, and I don't want to say it's 82% or 94%, but it's certainly a large majority of family offices are advanced bookkeeping shops. They're doing tax compliance and bookkeeping. That's where they start. And some of those people may have come from the operating business. They exist for compliance purposes largely. Hundreds and thousands of them. And I don't think they have an investment identity at all. So let's make sure we make that really clear. So the hierarchy or the nimbleness factor changes. The investment piece could be quite small and high performing. But as you get to the multi-generational family, you're going to have more and greater numbers of people simply to service those families. It's just simply no question about it. Now, last thing, and I'm not sure where this idea came from. What kind of cockamamie is it that an IPS is easy? You've got to be kidding me.
It's easy.
So an investment policy statement in terms of a governing document on its face, in terms of the document, I guess structurally to frame that and its elements is straightforward. But it is anything but straightforward when you get into the nature of the why a certain asset class is included, or if you're using mean variance optimization for diversification purposes on the long-only portfolio, which is table stakes today, that should be documented and codified. But I think everything else on the excess return side, the uncorrelated benefits, and why something is being included. What is the rationale for doing something? I'm going to do a direct investment in A, B, or C, and why? That's anything but straightforward. And over longer periods of time in terms of decision making could come into great conflict in terms of what in fact is the investment decision making authority, the governance conflicts that can be required to get decisions made. And I haven't mentioned at all the prosecution of the investment strategy, after which you've made a decision to do something, that you can actually execute on the strategy and exit the strategy given certain investments without some frictional cost and conflict. So it's anything but easy. On paper, I guess I could write out an IPS right now. But I think for great dynastic wealth, the creation and prosecution of an IPS is a thicket and is a great challenge and is a dynamic effort that requires great decision-making clarity and discipline.
In my opinion, some of what you said relative to that is reflective of the industry, implying to wealthy families and generational families that may not be as active in the investing front that you need us as a professional, that apparently your single family office is not good enough. You're not good enough internally. We're the quote unquote Wall Street investment professionals, and we're going to come in here and show you how it's done. They complicate matters. They don't simplify matters. Now, we're going to talk soon about investing, but I'm going to mention a couple of asset classes now. And I know I'm a little off track, but why do I need professional management to buy gold, to buy T-bills, to buy Bitcoin, to buy art, to buy fine wine and watches, to buy waterfront single-family homes like Ken Griffin and Jeff Bezos, to buy cattle ranches, which I'm looking at and I'm going to do in Montana and Wyoming, to buy stocks of great companies that I'm going to hold. Now, do I need banks and custodial relationships? Absolutely. Some of them are incredible. And I may need downside protection, swaps, derivatives, and options to help hedge certain risks of things that I'm doing. But I admit I jump a little bit ahead. What I am going to do, though, is throw a question to you that I probably don't have much to comment on. So I'm going to give the floor to you because it's more directly in your wheelhouse. But I think parts of it do impact the single family office community. And that would be Byron Trott in BDT and their, let's call it, merger with Michael Dell's MSD. We also look at what Viking into Rockefeller. And I'm almost looking at, is there any independence now of asset managers and MFOs? Is it all about scale? Is it all about growing? Does that allow them to be more nimble? Does that allow them to make better decisions? And as a single family office, maybe here's the key question, Jamie, why should I care what asset managers and MFOs are doing looking to grow to be $50, $100 billion?
Well, let me give you a whoa Nelly on that one. So, slow down a little bit. So we've got at least three big ideas that you just laid out. Let me just go through them in order. First, you were blathering on about asset classes that were all over the map. And I look forward to visiting you on your ranch. But I'm not an expert in buying ranches. I don't have a clue about timber.
It's easy. You don't need outside people.
I don't have an opinion about gold. That's me.
If you don't have an opinion, then why are you a family office?
Well, hold on.
The whole thing is that you're able to be nimble.
You made the comment apparently that you could do all those things.
Yes.
I can't. And a lot of people can do all that.
It's you, Jamie. It's easy.
That's just a ridiculous comment. And I think the reason it's ridiculous is there's way too much information for any one person to know. Now, there are some polymaths out there that probably could pull it off, but that's the nature of the investment tableau. There are many different places for you to take advantage, potentially.
And they're so awesome, Jamie.
Information asymmetry, and you may choose to do that. But there's too much to know, and it requires experts and people that can bring to bear some discipline to prosecute. This goes back to the IPS statement. A set piece in buying timber, I'll get a timber expert, I'll buy that Georgia property, blah, 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 and so on. But to do all of those things in the context of something that gets you the outcomes that you wanted to do in your governance statement of an IPS is wicked hard, and it requires a lot of discipline. Two, BDT and MSW. MSD and BDT. Hey, what a combination. I mean, those are two really, really great entities. They're great in every different measure I could offer, but certainly on the investment side, and most importantly, in terms of the upside and potential for that combination, they're being in the game, having access, and having tentacles out there. I mentioned before this information asymmetry to get opportunities and be the first adopter of many different things. It's a great combination that should be and will be a powerhouse, one could predict. And there could be other combinations like that. But that got into the third idea, which was, I think, the idea was that there's outside capital coming into the industry, and we can explore that in great depth. It's my swim lane, and I'm not sure where we want to start, but just to use that as a tipping off point, because I think it's a big topic. Is everybody in play? Hey, if you're a partner of one of these closely held entities, you have formed a partnership, typically an LLC, and multiples have bid up to where they are. And I think the multiples, by the way, are uncorrelated to the business cycle. I just think there's many more sellers than there are buyers. I think that's at the base of why we have the multiple expansion that's occurred. I'm not sure it can get any higher, but it's high. But to the degree there's capital sponsors that are entering the space at what you would say is an expensive price, they see the opportunity for them in terms of business that provides the effect of an annuity, a never-ending stream of a dividend that comes from what we see in the industry on the commercial side, these 98.5 and 99.2 client retention rates. It's extraordinary. And so this looks like a nice place to invest for income, that there could be a capital gain in return for the capital investment over multiple periods of time. To boot, this is pretty nice. This is a pretty nice deal. Now, I think the prices getting over 20x are unsustainable. That's where the numbers are, at least the reported number for Fisher. I don't believe any of these reported numbers anyway, so let's be clear on that. But the fact is, the market has clearly been bid up. And I think partners in these LLCs have a duty to themselves to not miss the opportunity where prices have gotten fairly high. But is everything for sale? I think so. I think for most of the G1 firms, this is where most of the RA land has been built, those that are scaling. For most of those G1 firms, I'll be 71 later this year. There's many people that are my age, and they literally cannot affect an internal transition without outside capital. That's a fact. So I don't have a problem with outside capital coming in and issuing. I don't have a problem with somebody selling. Here's where I draw the line. I think there's better capital, the capital that will allow us to achieve our needs to serve our clients, potentially regain control if they've given up control, and really do what we need to do to get to the scale and size opportunity that will allow us to do both the service mandate and the investment mandate. So I think we're going to see a transition. Last, and my final point is, I'm really sick and tired of hearing on the alternative firms that champion their independence. You can't be independent and do it on your own, living on free cash flow if you're a rinky-dinky billion-dollar firm. You really can't do a lot on your own without some form of outside capital to do something strategic. So I'm not in defense of the capital sponsors, but certain of them are more permanent, longer-term investors. Family offices, by the way, themselves are thinking about this as a place to invest. As allocators, they're longer-term investors. Pitcairn took some money from Temperance as an example. So I think that longer-dated capital could really help some of these firms get to the place where they can do a better job in service. Now, last, short-dated capital that are financial investors that want to flip these properties, shame on sellers that give away their control to one of those firms and, in fact, have disruption in the 5 to 8 year cycle of a portfolio fund. Shame on them.
I don't have as much to comment, Jamie. That was a little bit more in your wheelhouse. I have opinions, but because we have to the bottom of the hour, say 12:30 Eastern, there may be other topics. But if I had to briefly comment, perhaps more indirectly related, all I hear is size and scale. And to me, I look at bloated. I've worked in large organizations before. I realized before I knew about it that effectively, 20% of the people really effectively did 80% of the work. These industries, broadly speaking, are wickedly inefficient. They're overbloated. I don't want to add to the rolls of the unemployment here in the US. I'm just talking a reality and how the world has worked lately with technology, with the advent of AI, and how I'm using AI from a perspective of sourcing private companies, which I don't want to share too much of my private, more member content relative to that. Actually, all the things I'm talking about the advantage of a single family office, the ultimate in control, privacy, and customization, has absolutely never been easier, even if you're relatively, we may define it later, a so-called smaller single family office. The next topic, I'll take the lead on the initial open, and then I'll give it to you. I'm going to read it. the woeful underperformance net of fees of most active managers and 2 and 20 structures as GPLP structures, and why it's better, in my opinion, for family offices to internalize and do this internally. First of all, the triple Q will demolish the majority net of fees of venture capital firms that are out there in terms of the returns, especially over a 10-year period. Now, I picked on venture capital when it's getting kicked a little bit. I do think there are some incredible firms out there, some wickedly talented people, and that is a little bit of an insider's game. For the majority of you, you're not going to be able to get in there to some of the great larger quote unquote firms. You're going to have zero control and you're not going to be engaging. And again, I go back to it, the rising generation. If I invest in the triple Q, not only historically am I going to beat the majority that I'm being comparative to, I'm going to effectively know what I own and be totally liquid. And that creates an opportunity for me to also get in, get out, control my tax picture, and hedge internally with the help of perhaps outside resources in my banks or others to do so. And by the way, the triple Q and the S&P is going to be, it's just the math, the majority of long short hedge fund managers and active managers out there. Now, you could argue, like Leon Cooperman did, it was the government artificially suppressing interest rates over many a decade that made it harder. I do believe there is truth to that. And maybe things will change to a degree moving forward, but I'm a little bit reluctant to believe that at the moment. The reality is what I just described, specifically even in, say, the triple Q, and that doesn't mean that I don't form a thesis and I don't look, if I'm tactical or core satellite of my strategy, that it may not quite be buy and hold forever. Maybe we are living in a different paradigm and world now where I need to be more on top of my stuff. I think it was Buffett and Munger that said, maybe have a small basket, but watch it really, really closely. The reality is the vast majority over 10 years net of fees of active managers are not going to be the passive indices that I'm talking about. That you could also buy and own them internally, control your own tax picture, and be able to maybe not want to invest in certain companies that are in the indexes. These are all easy. Larger managers are effectively often asset gatherers. They placate specifically to institutions. They're too big, they're too slow, and they're really getting by, a lot of them, on their fee structure. They also can't be nimble on certain specific strategies. They may want to be more active, but our mandate states we can't put more than 2% in one company. We can't do this. We can't do that. We can't buy in too quickly because we'll move the market. We can't get out too quickly. Our pensions are going to get mad at us and move their $250 million away. For the most part, they could care less about even ultra high net worth individuals and single family offices. Now, and continuing in my quote unquote argument, let's break down for those that are charging 2 and 20. If I have 100 million, which is small, relatively speaking, in our single family office community that I'm allocating to a 2 and 20 structure, have you ever broken that down? First of all, at $100 million, I'm paying out $2 million up front. We all know, let's be optimistic, 14.4% doubles my money after 5 years. Let's say after 5 years, I'm now 100 million and I'm using round numbers. I'm now 200 million. So I'm going to pay 20% on the back end of the gain of my portfolio. That's tens of millions of dollars on top of the management fee that I've been paying. And then another one is the expenses that are built into the contract, but they're nuanced. They're not quite as transparent as they could be, and you really don't note it. So in my example, over a 5-year window, you just didn't feel it because you cut a check to that 1 or 2 alternatives. It wasn't technically the expenses feeling like a wire or a check out of your pocket. You could take that money and build a quality internal team on a given vertical that you may want to get involved in. And by the way, I'm still going to stick T-bills, gold, Bitcoin, art, wine, watches, buying waterfront homes. I could do that myself. I do not need a whole bunch of team of experts and layers of management and people. No, it's just an inaccurate comment and not true. And the reality is people have been saying that for years, and maybe I kept my mouth too quiet for a variety of reasons that I don't really need to do now on that. So families that claim we don't have the money, we need to outsource it, you're outsourcing it. And I gave a measly 100 million. Imagine if it's $500 million, $1 billion going into 2 and 20 private equity venture capital and hedge fund structures. You are paying so much in fees that are probably not outdoing the benchmark. You have no control. Your rising generation is not engaged at all. That's unacceptable. You have the capability, you have the money, including the monies that I just described, to do it internal. Why don't you go back in history, closer to 50 years ago, when Sid Bass, and I wrote about this years ago, plucked the 26-year-old Richard Rainwater out of Goldman. Now, eventually, did Rainwater even outgrow that? Absolutely, and that's okay. You may bring on an incredible talent that has a great run for 4, 5, 7 years. You pay them properly because they earn it and they deserve it, and they have skin in the game. But if they elect to go and do their own thing, you have contractual agreements in place to be a seed investor, to get favorable LP terms, but you let them do their thing because they want to become maybe that billionaire. That is probably not going to happen if you're working internally at a single family office. And my last comment, and then I'll give it to Jamie, is I'm also in those examples taking on counterparty risk. I don't really exactly know what the hell is going on, depending somewhat on the strategy in the fund. I have no control of taxes, no engagement of my rising generation, and I am taking on additional risk and a layer. Now I have a fund, I have to manage that. It gets messy. Jamie, pardon me, I went on a little long on that one. The floor is yours.
Wow. I got to unpack that one. That was quite an epistle. So what are you, Eugene Fama, that you've discovered efficient markets hypothesis? He got the Nobel Prize in 2013. You're 11 years late, at least. And he was teaching that at Booth, Chicago's business school, 20 years before that. So I think it's resolved by others that there are largely efficient markets. Okay, we got that. And that the 2 and 20 model for a large majority of hedge fund principals, certainly with interest rates, particularly on the short side, disintermediated in almost the entire industry for a period of time. But I don't think hedge funds are necessarily dead. I think people will exploit in the dynamic markets, in the business cycles and the macroeconomic opportunities and the events that occurred, certain information asymmetry. I think that's incontrovertible. It will continue. And yes, there is the QQQ. Good. Well, we've discovered passive investing. Yes. Come on, let's not repeat these known truths. And so some satellite opportunity that can really, I think, exploit some things for excess return is available to certain investors if they're willing to take that unit risk. So I'm not sure we're resolving anything here that is not already known to more sophisticated people that are attempting to navigate in this dynamic market. So I'm not sure there's any new efforts here. I think the 2 and 20 framework for most people is not a fair deal. And I think for really great managers, I think they may be able to exploit that, but I'm not sure who they are. There are very few that are left.
100%. We're on the same page there.
I just don't think that's a fair deal. I don't know if it was really ever a fair deal. I have no problem with performance fees, by the way. I never did. I think it's the nature of the alignment with them or the high watermark that are framed and so on. But 2 and 20, just that basic terms and conditions of the 2 and 20, I think that's a little outmoded too. Hey, just a comment, by the way, in terms of the hedge fund cycle. I don't predict anything. I'm not a hedge fund expert whatsoever, but I do think the interest rate environment was brutal for a long period of time for most of the hedge fund managers. And so there's been kind of a pox on that house. But I think there may be opportunity there in the future. I think the other thing that you mentioned, which I'm not sure I understand, is the opportunity, I think, to exploit typically in direct investments, things that are truly unique. They're completely uncorrelated. And why would that not be an opportunity for one to enjoy if they were aligned with the best source or manager of those investments, or if they did it themselves, they had some unique knowledge given their business vertical. So I'm not sure if you crossed a lot of known terrain there. We probably agree on almost all of what you said, but I think it's largely known. It's the past. It's embedded in, I think, what is the truths that we hold if we are to engage in some investment program in the future. I'm not sure it really portends anything for the future. And so I'm not sure what the points were, Angelo, with great respect.
Part of it relates to the fact that I don't need to have a massive team. I could have an intimate team. And the reality is the vast majority of active managers in a variety of different structures are not outperforming a benchmark net of fees, and they don't offer the liquidity and transparency. You make it seem like, well, yes, I broadly agree with you, Angelo, but the industry kind of knows that. There are still way too many alternative asset managers out there that don't have an edge. And shockingly, unfortunately, there's probably too many single family offices that are making what I deem to be poor decisions because they're outsourcing too much. And when you outsource, again, in my opinion, you insource. You take care of your investment policy statement, your asset allocation strategy. Now, related to your last comment, do I think that even a large single family office is going to do everything internal? No, that would be a bad decision. Do I think that some, let's go with the loose word, alternative managers are going to outperform consistently over time? Maybe at most 10%. It's probably closer to 5%, but let's even be a little optimistic. So sure, I think there are certain verticals, depending on the investment policy statement and the asset allocation strategy, that the family may want to be active in as an allocator. And if they feel they're not going to get passive or internal exposure, they should absolutely consider that some alternative managers are going to be a good fit. But understand, you may not know exactly what they're doing. You're going to have limited liquidity and transparency. But sure, like for instance, my audience knows, although they're always kind of rude to me, but it's fine. I am a fan of Mark Spitznagel and Taleb. I like what they do at Universa. I think that would be effectively impossible for a family to duplicate that internally. So as a tail risk strategy, if things go to hell in a handbasket, should I maybe have 1% or more of my portfolio in there for something I can't duplicate? There may be some real estate or infrastructure strategies where maybe I might be able to do better in alternative managers. I did interview Donatella Cigarelli, who ran a $15 billion European single family office, and she was allocated to over 100 different managers at any one time. To me, that's kind of ridiculous, but you know what? She pulled it off with good returns for her family, so kudos to her. The other topic, a little bit related to it, and maybe trending down a little bit of a sensitive road for some, is the fact of especially larger asset managers and MFOs are probably aware and concerned about issues pertaining to diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and climate change. They may need to be careful in terms of who they're recruiting with young people coming out of universities that want to work in a certain kind of firm. How are they placating to them? How are they making or not making decisions? Myself, I'm extremely interested in oil and gas. I'm interested in looking at opportunities either directly or sometimes through a fund that I personally could look at. So I want to have the freedom and flexibility to create my own parameters and not be subject to an organization that may be placating to being politically correct, to be able making certain hires and having it impact the strategies that they do and what they look out for that may not be what I care about as a family. I'm done, Jamie, on that part.
Wow. Well, you really walked into the woke argument, didn't you?
I always like to go against the woke argument, so you bet you. And I do that all the time.
Well, I think it's fair to say that the broadly based, those investment constraints around what may have been ESG in its day. Currently, we're using terms like diversity and inclusion, or any other things that are put to bear on investments, would tend generally to have some constraints. On the other hand, and I want to make sure it's clear, I think there's an emerging opportunity for people on impact. I just do. The proof is still out there. Some people are going to have to prove that it has the ability to do good and actually bring to bear some measurable returns, either in public goods or investment outcomes. But I think there will be an opportunity, simply because I think the demographics are compelling. I don't want to prosecute the discussion on climate change right now as an example, but I think there will be an increasing demand to find solutions around climate change that will attract capital. I think that's a fairly self-evident truth. So I think there's an opportunity for impact investing. I'm not sure the commercial wealth management industry has done it yet. I'm not sure where the leadership is on that. But I'm not sure why we had to introduce the woke question of DEI here at a time like this, because that's a trap neither one of us will come out of without some scars.
Well, I like some scars.
So I think that there are changes in the demographics of the next generation of young people that are entering the business in favor of companies that want to do good, have values-driven enterprises, and are going to do some things that I think will change what I think many of the younger generation believe is the world that the baby boomers broke. So I think it's fair that there is a trend in this direction, but I think generally speaking, any one of those areas that are constraining would have some negative impact on what have been traditional measures of outcomes for investing. So notwithstanding that, I think impact investing is something that we just need to be mindful of is going to occur. You mentioned one other thing, and we elided through it. We haven't really answered it. I want to make sure the audience hears at least my thoughts on it. I don't disagree with you on insourcing. You're making it sound as if insourcing is the way to go. I think what you're saying, I infer that you think fewer people can do a better job. And I agree with that if you have the right people. But I think outsourcing is required if you're going to do what would be the full non-investment services platform for super wealthy. To do everything yourselves embedded into the direct cost, staff expense of a family office is an unsustainable, very expensive model. And there's many ways we can measure that, replacement cost being one, where you can go outside and get better, less expensive solutions on the non-investment side. So let's make sure we are clear. I'm not opposed to outsourcing on the commercial enterprise or family office, both, if it can get on the non-investment side things that would avoid embedded cost that are better solutions. So I just want to make sure we covered that topic.
Yeah, actually, insourcing and outsourcing was going to be the last topic, but you hit upon some good points, and that'll make a couple of minutes of our discussion. It may be a little more boring to some people, maybe not as bombastic as some of the things we're talking about now, but yes, I promise it's on the docket. I did have a comment on that, Jamie, but why don't we save that a little bit? The next question, I admit, is probably a little more in my wheelhouse, although technically it's your turn to go first. And I have mentioned it 2 or 3 times already. I'll ask the question. Let's reframe it a little bit. In apparently Angelo's opinion, there is no really long-term dynastic wealth without an AKA a family empire, which I was told by the woke crowd to stop using that. Of course, I'm not going to listen to them. There is, in my opinion, and my experiences, no dynastic wealth and great family empire without direct ownership and control of private companies. I'm not necessarily meaning, Jamie, ones that we start as entrepreneurs and maybe generational. That's awesome, by the way. But I look at myself and others. I want to own and I want to control. Now, I'll talk a little bit about a holdco, about getting an operator in my holdco that may specialize in that vertical, that I'm giving them a piece of the upside. But to me, this is the way that I've seen with others around the world and how, again, things are becoming more efficient, if I believe that in public markets, that I want to have the control. I want direct ownership. So for me, I'm an extreme advocate in that, but pardon me, this was for you to go first if you wanted to and answer that question.
I'm not sure if that's a question or a comment, but I think the topic is dynastic wealth and the nature of the dynastic wealth maintaining control either over their primary initial operating business or control in investments that they make, presumptively direct investments. I can't argue with that. I think that's, I'm not going to say it's self-evident, but I think that is directionally correct. And the control, the need for control is really important. When you've developed, as an entrepreneur, when you've developed business expertise in a specific vertical, an industry or area, and you get larger, you have a huge opportunity. You might even, in some ways, become the market. You'd see many deals, you'd see better deal flow, you can make decisions on timing and so on. So I think the nature of what you're saying is, again, unknown and not surprising. And I think it's worth exploring further, but I'm not sure we're going to solve anything on this call, Angelo. I think we're in agreement.
Okay, I mean, the next question related to it, so I'll kind of segue into it. But a comment that I'll make upon what I said and maybe Jamie said, and this is sometimes a fallacy among when I speak to college students and those, Angelo, I'm just not an entrepreneur. I'm not creative. I can't think of a great business idea. Well, you may be fortunate to come from the right family or build up the right resources where perhaps buying into an existing business that is inefficient, that your systems and operations, your management style, your technology stack, your marketing, most businesses, especially things that I'm looking at, let's call them boring blue collar businesses. They're owned by baby boomers. They're not overly sophisticated in marketing and things from that perspective. There's tremendous opportunities. There are literally millions of businesses for sale, millions. Now, are most of them going to be applicable to $100 million plus families? No, but some of them are, and some of them could be to quote unquote the rising generation. And a reminder, Zuckerberg purchased Instagram. Elon didn't start Tesla, he purchased it. And by the way, in my opinion, the Zuck purchase of Instagram, which we all thought, probably including me, in 2013 was overpaid, ended up being one of the greatest purchases, let's call it that, of all time. So I am an extreme advocate of forming your own holding company and being active, even if you're just getting your feet wet, in terms of looking at sourcing, negotiating, buying, and in my opinion, effectively owning and controlling private companies. You may start small. Maybe it's mobile homes, mobile home parks, RV parks, car washes, which actually are, trust me, I know, more expensive than many of you may think from the outside looking in. You're not going to be as competitive with most private equity firms that don't really look at those, although there's more and more smaller to early mid-size so-called private equity firms that are. If you want real alpha and you want to have control, have tax control, and engage the rising generation, certain tenements, I agree, I keep on coming back to over and over again. You really need to do this. I know some of you are going to say the family members are just not interested, and that's okay. I'm not saying to force them. Depending on the size and scale of the family, every family member should know the basics of finance, of how the world works, of banks, of relationships, of private companies. But I get it. Not every family member is going to want to be engaged with that. And maybe dynastic or family empire, and Jamie hinted at this earlier, maybe you think it's not necessarily a good thing, that maybe it is good that the money goes back into the system, whether you want to call it government, taxation, etc. I'm going to disagree with that. And I know that's going to get me, as it always does, extreme hate from one side of the aisle, that I'm, billion-dollar families and single family offices own and rule the world. I just feel that this is very important. And you're going to be told that you can't do this. It's too hard. How are you going to compete with these giant organizations that have teams of dozens and dozens of people? In certain verticals, they are correct. It is going to be hard to compete in certain verticals, but I think there's a lot more opportunities that are way easier than you think. I'm living and going through it in the moment and things that I'm looking at, which are blocks of car washes, ranch and cattle, and things, a little bit of RV parks, mobile home parks. I think there's tremendous opportunity, tremendous. And is it as exciting and potentially the multiple I'm getting in my AI and my crypto investments? No, but I want diversity in terms of what I do. Maybe I'm going to reframe it a little bit as a question for you because it came up from the audience, Jamie, from Tom. And Tom is basically stating, I think agreeing a little bit with some more of your perspective, that it's not all about return. You're willing to give up some return in exchange for dampening volatility. So maybe he's talking about quality long short managers or active managers. Now that we are heading into a different or are in a different interest rate environment, is it about stability of return? I'm going to argue, no, Tom, that's what hedge fund managers like to tell us because they placate to their institutions and they underperform the benchmarks and claim that, well, we have less volatility. Therefore, once every 15 years, we're going to be proven right. I'm not buying into that. Families are taxable. I think families do need to be a little bit more tactful to real inflation, to purchasing power. And some of them, I think, are just playing it too safe. Again, Jamie, I covered a lot of ground. You may not even have really that much to add. We can move to the next question, but I will give that to you.
That was like the bulldozer moved some of the topsoil to one side of the field, and then you went to the other side, and the bulldozer brought it back. So I'm not sure I have much to add. It's fertile ground.
Well, that's Tom's fault.
Again, it's I do think there is one little wrinkle there that would be worth commenting on right now, given that question that you just repeated. I do think the market broadly, and I'm not talking about family offices or ultra high net worth investors, I think the market broadly moved away from the presumption that they could outperform the market and socialized the investment community, all investors, that they should look at batting average and downside, upside outcomes, and that they were doing something salutary if they had better downside risk. I think the market socialized everybody to that. I think that was because they couldn't produce alpha, so they took the ball off that and went to the whole body. I mean, it's now an academic course of study. They went to an objectives-based approach. And one of the objectives may be to, compress my volatility, particularly on the downside. So, but I think that, again, I don't think we need to cover that ground. That's what
Tom is giving a follow-up, and I'm going to reframe it a little bit. Angelo, if I'm invested, whatever, say it's 15% of my portfolio into triple Q or something like it, even if it's individual stocks within there, suppose I wake up one day and it's down 40%. I could argue I'm buying great companies for the long term, and look at what happened in 87 and 94 and 2000. Sometimes patience is going to matter. And there also are things I could do with my banking relationships where I may be willing to give up a little bit of my upside in either swap, derivative, or option strategies to not go to bed worrying that I may wake up and things are down 40%. But that also is the benefit of proper investment policy statement, of asset allocation. Now, this gets a little, I don't want our discussion to really go down this road, Jamie, because we have two of the most important topics upcoming as we take it a little bit to the home stretch. But I could argue that brings up the whole thing about concentration, diversity in our holdings. The old adage, you want to become rich, you be concentrated. You want to have greater safety from volatility. Supposedly, you become more diversified. I'm not perfectly sure that I buy into that latter comment. And I'm going to make a comment that's going to be very offensive to some people. I'm going down some dangerous roads here, Jamie. Don't forget, Bill Gates could have been worth $1.2 trillion. He's not. I think he's going to be fine at his 140 billion, by the way, but he diversified away from Microsoft. Now, let's even ignore the fact that his foundation likely did incredible things. If we take that block of money, he still would have had something like, I think the math was 600 or 700 quote unquote billion. So I could make the argument, be very careful with diversification. I'm going to go back to the earlier Munger comment about maybe have an intimate number of eggs in your basket and watch them closely.
Well, again, these are all bromides. We're not covering any new ground. These are known. I think the only comment I can make is there's many different ways to invest, and one has to know thyself, frame their own objectives. They have to come from within, and then they have to either themselves or through others prosecute that investment policy approach. And there's many different variations.
Great. And why don't we segue to what I think are going to be probably the two most important topics, in my opinion, that we're going to cover. And you get the first dibs on the first one. I claim in my comment that for a single family office, and maybe I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek here, there is no war for talent. In my opinion, a single family office wants you and is willing to pay. That's the optimal in terms of quote unquote a place to work. I think you're going to vehemently disagree, but why don't I give that comment and that floor of the so-called war for talent to you?
Well, the talent war is on in the industry broadly. Those are people that work either in the investment area or other client-facing areas for commercial wealth management firms and single-family offices. It's a fairly well-known and established, and it's where I work, so I can see it directly. I see it as a real challenge. There's just not enough people that are entering the business or are trained in the business to do the work of serving taxable clients. So it's a pronounced area. It's a topic that the Ultra High Net Worth Institute, of which I'm a co-founder and active in, is trying to tackle. The terms that get bandied around. My friend Tom McCulloch in Toronto uses the term the integrated advisor. Other people talk about the expert generalist. But all of these people are in demand, and there are just not enough of them. And so where do they come from? On the investment side, I think they come from what are the existing places. They come out of the academy. They may be in or out of the academy. They come in and out of industry. They cut their teeth. Ultimately, they have some prowess on the investment side. I will also say, just for the record, I am a little wary of some younger people that haven't been through multiple business cycles. But that notwithstanding, I think there is a fairly fluid, inefficient development of talent process on the investment side. I don't think that will change. Many of those people come over to the family office, multifamily office, ultra high net worth type firm in the wealth management industry. So that's pretty fluid and efficient. I think all the rest is just a huge, huge gap. Why? The gap is first in the side on the demand. There's just many more wealthy people. There are many more wealthy people that need many more services. The expectation that the family office or commercial wealth management firm will deliver solutions. Who would have believed this? Legal, tax, philanthropic, risk management solutions. One of my clients, one of my favorite clients, has a director of health and wellness that's handsomely paid. Who would have expected these people would be embedded staff costs 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago? So the efficiency ratio for most of these firms, the unit cost for employees against the fixed cost overall, has actually, the efficiency has gone down, cost income ratio. And so I think that's because of a service expansion, but also because of the lack of talent. There are just many more families that need more staff, whether they're in single family or multi-family family or ultra high net worth firm. So that's the issue. So where are they going to come from? I think there's a training and development challenge that's just huge. And I'm not sure if the industry has yet figured it out. The Ultra High Net Worth Institute has a wonderful initiative. It's a wonderful initiative. Theoretically, who is this integrated advisor and how do we find them? How do we develop them? What's the design around, in fact, meeting this talent gap? So there's a talent gap without question. I can't say I know exactly the answer, but this is my theory. I think the Post-Reformation Guild comes to mind. I think we're going to have to make them. We're going to have to make them in our own model, our own design. I personally believe, and this is not casting an aspersion on any individual, but I personally believe that people that want to entertain a role in counseling that came out of a product manufacturing and distribution model, one of the broker dealers, is probably not going to be appropriate in a counseling role, which is where most of these functional duties lie. And so the industry literally needs to make them as if they were apprenticing and going through the journeyman function and ultimately coming up through some kind of a master class. But unless that happens, I think you're going to continue to see a huge talent gap last. And it's quite an observation. It's really quite an observation. I don't think people in the, and I've got to be tiptoeing around this word, in the leading, may I say the leading academic institutions, I don't think they're hankering to come in to the wealth management business. In fact, I think the family office world has probably more allure to them than does wealth management broadly. For some reason, family offices are cool. I think they'll be disappointed when they'll learn that most family offices don't compensate people particularly well.
I got to change that, Jamie.
So I think that there is, in general, not a demand from the leading academic institutions for people to come into our industry. So those are just observations.
I mean, I think those are excellent points. And actually, I took some notes, things that I could learn from. I'd like to talk to you after the fact about that. So I appreciate your comments. So a part of it, I definitely agree with. And yes, I don't quite know how compared to when I started there 20 years ago, but single family offices, which will relate to this question on the war for talent, have become, let's go with the word sexy. And the reality is most kind of do underperform. I kind of agree with that as well. And part of that is frugality. Part of that is not understanding the expenses in the 2 and 20 structure and other things that I brought up where the reality they could repurpose that internally. And in my opinion, not only obviously get better control and better engagement, but get better results. We could debate and argue that. And I agree with you on the training front as well. I gave the example earlier of iconic entrepreneur, investor, and family principal Sid Bass and plucking a 26-year-old Richard Rainwater. Richard Rainwater was not the Richard Rainwater that we would know into the late 70s and 80s, early when he was 26 years old. He had the inherent capability, but it was Sid Bass and the time he spent with him that really got the best out of him. And eventually it was time to move on. And I also covered those subjects a little bit earlier as well. Maybe to a degree, what I'm saying on the war for talent and when I say no true war, if a single family office really wants someone, it's going to be an attractive opportunity. Now, we could get into the weeds of family offices say one thing and deliver another. Is there nepotism? Is the principal older and going to pass away and then everything falls apart? Do they live up to their bond? Even if there is an agreement, the family office has way more money than the executive and they may lose in court. That would be a deeper multi-hour discussion. I actually did a program 2 years ago with a European who worked in 3 single family offices. It was titled 10 Reasons Not to Work. It was a little tongue in cheeky, but it was pretty accurate. 10 reasons not to work in a single family office. But I'm an advocate that a single family office has the resources. Stop being frugal, aim for excellence.
Well, last point, though, let's be clear on this one big separator in terms of compensation. I spend a lot of time on compensation in my work. So let's just go there for a second just to finish up on the talent question. And it doesn't matter what the age is. If you're going to spend your entire life as an employee, your compensation is going to come in salary. And so the real wealth opportunity, if you want to be in this industry, wherever, family office or commercial wealth management firm, comes with ownership. It is, without question, not available within most single family offices. Now, they can come up with some things on the investment side for certain co-investment rights, certain other ways that the investment team can be better compensated. But generally speaking, there's no ownership available, no equity available to existing people. So in most family offices, you'll always be an employee. For most people that want to build a career and be an owner, that's a negative.
And how many people, one, really want to be an owner? And if I'm a family office, as I'm describing, who wants to be active in direct ownership and control of private companies, I am going to have the capacity to give carry and bonuses to potentially pay very, very well. But like I did state earlier, for those that are wickedly entrepreneurial, that maybe even making, in theory, tens of millions of dollars is not enough. They want more, or at least complete independence. Then yes.
Well, I don't want to miss the point I'm making. You mentioned carry. I agree with that, but just let's make it really clear. I believe ownership is the great indicator and determinant of outcomes. It is a behavioral predicate for the best performing firms that I've observed. Ownership.
Then I also have the opportunity to create an investment company within maybe a holding company that I have, that there is a shared ownership. And that's, I think, a little bit of what Bass did with Rainwater in a different perspective near 50 years ago. I'm not disagreeing with you, Jamie. I think to some degree on this one, we're probably more on the same page. But I think it's possible for families to create that sort of entity. Jamie?
I think I agree with you. So okay. I don't know if I have a comment. We're in sync.
And I'm going to go a little back to the area that I said earlier that I know you didn't agree with, but I'm sorry. Buying T-bills, buying gold, buying Bitcoin, okay, I may need an outside expert for a little bit of guidance on wine and watches and cattle ranches and art, but I don't need necessarily to be an LP in the fund or active management to invest in any of those, to me, very important, potentially for the family. And I mentioned the stocks. I want to be, for the most part, I may want to be tactical on hedging, but I want to be more of a long-term investor. I don't quite buy into value and growth. I want to buy a good company and I want to potentially hold it for a long amount of time and hope it ends up being a good historical investment for me. And I just believe in single family homes, waterfronts, again, I'm talking to billionaires or the like, I mention are all things where I don't think I need to overcomplicate it. I think it is, in my opinion, relatively straightforward. And I think if you're a family office and you really want to build something great, again, the average family office wants to be left alone. A good one wants to be mentored, and probably a great one wants to be told the truth. I don't think there's a lot of great family offices out there, but I think the quality could absolutely be much, much better with a level of productivity, a structure and systems and processes and best practices, including some of the principles that we're talking about today. My next question was a little more ancillary to the last question, and it may be just a minute or so from our perspectives. I'll give it to you. Alignments of interest. And how does that matter to a single family office? You could take that several different ways, from the internal talent and their alignment of interest to me outsourcing to asset managers and MFOs. And where is the alignment of interest, and does that matter?
Well, I think we covered that ground. I'm not sure what else I can contribute on alignment. I think alignment in the nature of investing is the preferred option anyone would choose if they were given that chance. The degree of alignment then is the question. How can I get a higher level of alignment? Better terms, perhaps, and The last point I'll make, I've repeated it before, I think we all have self-interest as a species. And so to the degree that we can do due diligence, operational and investment due diligence on the level and nature of the alignment, I think it needs to be constantly explored and revisited. What are the incentives for individuals, for instance, in terms of compensation, and how does that misalign behaviors? There's many ways to look at it, but I accept that there is a great preference for alignment of interest. I think it's really largely where we're moving in a direction on the commercial wealth management side, where firms that are emerging from the product manufacturing, the traditional product manufacturing and distribution, supply-driven business, to where demand today favors counseling. I think the demand is for a higher alignment of interest, and it's why many of the big firms are being disintermediated, because they're perceived to be in the business of product peddling and asset gathering. So I think alignment is a preferred route. I think it's in the nature of the species that you would want to have more alignment with any one person that you're working with, on the presumption that they are your agent.
I think Jamie and I are effectively on the same page there. He is correct. We kind of covered parts of this a little bit earlier. I did speak to some very prominent, I didn't say family office recruiters, more broad Fortune 100 recruiters. And there's a couple of things that they told me around incentives and alignment of interest. When it comes to also talent and the war for talent in the family office, one of them said, I think it's a repeat of what Reed Hastings at Netflix said, that one person who's a 10, just one, is worth 28s. And we would think that an 8 is actually pretty good. And this goes back to, there's no statues for committees, only to incredible individuals. So sometimes one person, especially in a relatively intimate structure like a family office, is worth an incredible amount in value to you as a single family office in your family. One person could change everything. It can be that impactful. And you're going to want to properly source that person, put them in a position to succeed, make sure that we have, quote unquote, an alignment of interest, and incentivize and pay them very well. To think that they're not motivated by opportunity and compensation is just foolish. I know it may sound politically correct. They want to work in an environment that they enjoy and have ice cream and do this or that. None of that matters. What really matters to them are the things that I'm talking about, and money is able to buy them security and freedom for their family. If you think that doesn't matter and you're a single family office, then I definitely have major disagreements with you. We did cover one of the questions that I listed relative to the triple Q, and even S&P is going to crush, quote unquote, net of fees over time, most active managers. So we'll skip that. And Jamie, I think we're all here. The last question, and you did bring this up, and we're probably going to disagree, but that's what makes it a fun debate. And I'm going to let you go. Does the single family office make economic sense is the wrong question, but you may think it actually is the right question. Why don't I give it to you and hear what you have to say?
Well, I'll just assert that many of them don't make any economic sense, but that's my opinion, and I'm not sure it matters. And it doesn't mean someone would be willing to do what they'd like to do for their own purposes, privacy, control. You mentioned these before, customization and so on. They might do something that is economically less advantageous to them, but that's their choice. Their unit cost may be higher, but that would be what is the cost of doing this notion of privacy, customization, or control. I can't quarrel with that. But I think in terms of unit cost, there are too many examples of this, and I'll say that I'll openly say this as a bit of an observation that's a bit of a riddle, that if people are willing to pay, JP Morgan did a study, came out in May, that the average cost for $1 billion family office was $6.1 million. So that's a bogey that's in the market. I think the sample was large. I think that's probably a pretty valid number, but that is very expensive. And why would a family not choose of that size or half that size to get a commercial provider to provide them presumptively the same solutions with greater scale, therefore better service, for much lower cost. Why is that happening? I think it's because of what you've observed. There is a preference to do it themselves or for privacy, control, or customization. So the commercial wealth management firms may in fact have shortcomings that they have to overcome to show those families that are presumptively overpaying why their platform can do it better, and then assert on a replacement cost basis that the economics are better and the service is the same. So the burden's on the commercial wealth management firm to win the hearts and minds of those families that are presumptively overpaying.
And I guess the part B of that question, I'll allow you to flow into it because they relate to each other. Why insourcing can be better than outsourcing to a single family office?
Geez, I think generally speaking, the choice to embed a cost, that's the insourcing choice, has to be done with great care, particularly for smaller family offices. And should they be able to get great athletes, if I can use that term, that are versatile, that can fulfill various service requirements for the family, it might mean that with more versatile athletes, that might be fewer versatile athletes, they can do more. But at some point in time, I think the choice to find expertise outside is a logic that is immediately available when you recognize the market cost for embedding any one of the real experts on your staff, particularly on the investment side. So it can be very expensive to do it yourself. That's just the simple truth.
Sure. Okay. I mean, my take on it, and I think Jamie makes some excellent and very valid points. I was actually also going to bring up the JP Morgan study. I believe for an average quote unquote $1 billion family was 6.1 million. And I think there was an earlier study of about a $500 million or below family office that Citi did with Trish Botoff of Botoff Consulting, showed it to be about 1.5 to 1.8 million. And like Jamie said, I agreed broadly with the JP Morgan number. And I think that below $500 million, what Trish and Citi did, I broadly speaking agree with that.
Yeah.
So
they're good. They're good indicators.
Of course, I agree with you. And we don't have enough benchmarking and ideas to help us frame how things could improve. If we can't measure it, how are we going to improve it? So my comments to that would be, including on the 6 million, it may not even be enough. Like if you want greatness in your family and you want to have the right structures and the right talent, you are absolutely going to have to pay. Actually, honestly, in certain positions, you may have to overpay. But if that allows you to have privacy, control, and customization, to keep it internal, to have the internals, the controls be internal, to have the customization that you want, and to have, you hope, a dedication of long-term employees, especially actually in the non-financial roles that may be very personal to you, from opening up mail to bookkeeping to accounting. And maybe they need to deal, and they probably should, with certain outsourced resources, but as a buffer and an intermediary with you. Now, there is an old adage, if you want it to be excellent, then you build it internal. But if you can't build it internal, then why don't you go to a firm that supposedly has greater resources? And that's not bad. I agree that certain deep estate planning and tax issues, I want to have some of the deepest minds at McDermott, at Withers, and other prominent firms. But I also want to have some level of capability to help interpret that internally. Now, I gave extreme examples of very niche subjects that probably wouldn't make as much sense on a one-time opportunity for that family to bring in internal. So this is an age-old debate relative to internal or external. And I go back to, and I know it's been repetitive from both McLaughlin and me, because I said it, privacy, control, and customization. I want loyalty from my employees. I have to treat them right. I have to pay them right. I want to build internal structures because I feel this is going to be the better option for me than outsourcing. And again, I just scratch my head sometimes on the GPLP model and various asset managers where maybe you're just not feeling it, but use your head. This is not free. Banks and others should not be working for free. They're commercial enterprises. You should pay for the value that you're getting. So why aren't you doing that internal? Now, if you tell me as a family, and by the way, You ran a family business oftenly with an iron fist and to maximize profits and had an exit, but now the legacy and your capital is not getting that same level of attention. I don't understand. Which goes back to, is a single family office right for every, even multi-billion-dollar family? Apparently, the obvious answer is no. If you're not looking to be great, in my opinion, and I know part of that is qualitative, why bother? And I go back to my earlier adage about average, good, and great, quote unquote, family offices. I desire, this is my obsession, my passion for single family offices, not just to survive. I did that in the title because apparently it gets more clicks than the word thrive. But with a single family office with the right internal governance, structures, and talent, and an idea to strategize and to execute in what they're doing moving forward and engaging the rising generations, I think we make it way more complicated than it really is. So I do think the single family office is the ultimate. They just have to get better because right now, broadly speaking, they're not good enough. But there's lots of room for improvement. And again, I go back to state, and I know this is going to get snickers from people, I actually just don't think it's that hard. I think it's pretty straightforward. Jamie, what I'm going to do, and I want to be respectful of your time, is give you a chance, as I'm also looking at potential questions coming in, to kind of give some parting and final comments, please.
I think the main thing we can agree on is that we're in an evolution, and the evolution has two contributing parts. There is an extraordinary concentration of wealth that's occurred globally, particularly in North America. I am in observation of, and it's really been a great privilege and observation of the industry and many families. I think they want to do good, and I think they often don't know how, but they'll seek solutions to do good. I don't think the class of great wealth creators are bad people. I think they've been innovators, risk takers. They've enjoyed the privilege in the Western democracies of having jurisprudence, capital markets, and just the innovative nature of the culture supporting their wealth creation, which is a public good. And I think they will, in return, do good. So I'm a sort of an optimist for the class. I will also say, so it's clear, if they don't do good, the Western democracies are at risk and there will be social unrest. So I'm going to just make that very clear. But I think we're in an evolution, and the evolution is an industry that's moving over a 35 or 40-year cycle from product manufacturing and distribution that was driven by supply, largely Wall Street concentrated partnerships early, now public companies. And I think the demand from families of great wealth is for counseling across a whole host of issues that were never before contemplated in the investment regime, that are of a non-investment services nature. And so I see the industry in this inflection point as still early, if not inchoate. And so in the development of many of the, what I would call professional standards, benchmarking, and best practices, we're still early. And I think that's why it's just an exciting time. And I just feel privileged to be part of it.
Well, you're very kind, broadly sharing your commentary, Jamie. That was an excellent wrap. And I agree with you, as many people seem to think that we're in the latter stages of single family offices and broadly family offices, including virtual and MFOs. I agree more with you that it's relatively early, that things are changing rapidly. And I agree with you. I mean, I'm someone who's done a significant consulting assignment and has an upcoming masterclass called Sovereign Risk and Disaster Preparedness. And a large part of that is politics, geopolitics, and how the world works and how things are changing. And yes, if I could state that number 400 in the Forbes 400, the last one is worth $7 billion in the real-time Forbes 400. When I ask most people that question, they think it's 1.5 or 2 billion. So the concentration of wealth is extreme. It's rapidly escalated since COVID among the super rich. And could that cause issues that we are seeing playing out now around the world? And do the rich have to kind of give back, have to realize that there may be certain things to acquiesce on, and that we're having grave challenges in the West and here in the US as well? And we could go on and on about that. I won't bore the audience with it, but these are important topics to discuss. And again, where are these discussions in the community? Because they're very sensitive to people. I kind of cared less about being sensitive to people and political correctness probably about 2 years ago. It has kind of hurt me and also served me well with an intimate group that loves from my perspective, which could very well be wrong, but hopefully my bluntness and directness. So I love the subject. I would probably prefer the word thriving single family office than surviving, but apparently you all seem to have liked survival better. I greatly appreciate Jamie being my initial guest to kind of have a debate series with. And those of you that are live or watching on recording, please make other suggestions. The honest answer is I'm pretty connected in the community. I've reached out to multiple people, and most people are uncomfortable with a little bit of an argumentative style. Again, I have to really give McLaughlin here a hell of a lot of credit. These were basically effectively my questions, my platform, a little bit of my pulpit and loud mouth, and he came on with no qualms, with no special conditions. Now, Jamie's very gifted. It's very fortunate to have him on, and we have some things we agree on, and some things we kind of rather vehemently and made it maybe a little sparky for the audience disagree on. And what did I state earlier? If debate is great, if you're wrong, you learn. It's an opportunity that you know what you know. Why don't you know what you don't know? So some of you may have recommendations. DM me, email me, and I'm going to give Jamie a chance to share for those of you, and whether you're a single family office, an asset manager, an MFO, or broadly in the community, how you would not reach out to Jamie, at least interact with him and see if the work that he does could be a good fit for you, then like something's wrong with you. So Jamie, if you don't mind, how could people learn more about you and reach out?
Well, you're very kind. And Angelo, you were well behaved today. My website is jhmclaughlin.com. I can't help also, just because it's part of, I hope, my legacy. I also would commend the audience to know and learn more about what the Ultra High Net Worth Institute is doing, uhnwinstitute.org. A very important part of my life at this stage of my career in the development of a think tank that is disinterested is a place, I think, for learning, sharing, and advancing the industry. So thank you for that very much.
Thank you, Jamie. And in terms of my close, everyone, I'm Angelo Robles. Some of you who may haven't seen me in a while know me as being the founder and longtime CEO at Family Office Association. I sold it. I created structures with my own family office and holding company. I am very active in a lot of the process, including governance with my family and as an allocator. I also do a masterclass and consultative series. I admit I'm unabashed and extreme advocate of the single family office done right. And I have a private club called SFO Continuity that is dedicated only to families and SFOs. I'm initially really only looking for 30 founding members, and we're almost there. And we have incredible members as early founders. I've been very fortunate. They get my proprietary content, connectivity, and literally we host about 30 private programs around the country throughout the year. And simply go to angelorobles.com. You kind of can't miss what I have up there. It's actually pretty simple and straightforward. And I would look for all of you to hopefully follow me more on social and be active and have an opportunity to reach out. Jamie, again, I'm very appreciative of you. I hope you have an incredible remainder of the summer. You gave me a lot of things to think about and to rethink in terms of some of my positions so I could learn more. I always believe in thinking for yourself. So I appreciate you and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.